All right, welcome CS11 to DOM1 and DOM2 smashed together. That is because of Memorial Day. So Memorial Day is awesome. Give everybody a little break. Hopefully nobody took a break from learning and you studied some of this stuff over the weekend, so it's more of a review than the first time. We are going to go way faster. We're going to go 2 times faster than we normally do because we need to catch up with yesterday, knowing that we have recordings from previous days. So DOM1 for CS10 with me for all the stuff I'm going to be talking about, 2-hour deep dive. So if you want to get the full experience of what I'm going to be touching on today, I recommend go watching this at like 1.5 speed. It's actually really nice to speed me up. I feel like I talk so slow. So in this case, that's awesome. And then in DOM2, we'll have the same video. There'll be a DOM2 for CS10. They're both extremely applicable and very recent content. So this is where I would point you if you thought today went too fast. So here we go. We're going to be talking about the document object model, the DOM. The document object model is basically 3 parts, right? The document. So in this case, the document is the window. What you see on this page is the document. Go ahead and I want you guys to, in your browsers, right-click if you're in Chrome. I think it works in other browsers as well, but we're going to focusing on Chrome. So right-click and inspect, get your DevTools open. And I want you to notice that you can see everything that we've already are super familiar with by now. But let's go to the console and let's type in document. Document. I want you to just hit enter. Look at that. Little object appears. Well, look at this. The document actually has a tree structure, tree-like structure, if you will, of all the elements on the page. Pretty neat. And now, of course, if we go up here and we hover over these elements, we can see them highlighting, right? But notice that we're in the console. We're not actually in the element selectors, the element tab, if you will. So console, we're in JavaScript here. So what's happening is the document object model is actually an API. It's an application programming interface, which basically means that we are drawing a bridge between other languages and this interface. You know, you might be going, what the heck? Well, let me annotate this a little bit so we can get a visualization. So let's say we have a bridge here between 2. Wow, I'm just awful. That's a great bridge. There we go. Make it look kind of like a bridge. So over here we have our HTML, and over here we have our JavaScript. And how do these two communicate with one another? Well, this bridge right here is the DOM, the document object model. And so what this does is it's built in a certain way and follows a certain standard. And that standard is what we call an application programming interface, or an API. And so this says, look, if you always follow this rule, you'll always get this result. And if you always follow this rule, you'll always get this result. So a lot of people don't understand that the DOM is actually not part of the JavaScript proper family. It's its own API that JavaScript uses to manipulate the window in the browser. I thought that was pretty cool. I think a lot of people skip over that. So there's a little deeper knowledge on the DOM and what it means for you. And okay, so let's talk about this tree structure for a second. So this is the model of the M. So the object is that everything is objects. Hopefully you guys are totally understanding that from last week. Last week we just went nuts with objects. We understand prototypal inheritance. We built our own objects. We extended our objects. So guess what? The DOM creates objects every time it renders the page. That's why when we went to the console log, we could see everything. So that's the O. So the document is the window, the O is the objects, and the M is the model in which we access them. And the M looks like this, looks like a tree. So you might be going, that's cool, but let's take a little deeper look at this. So I have this cool thing called a DOM visualizer. It's in the training kit. I'll just throw it in the chat so you can see it. So let me go to chat. There we go. So if you want to click that, it'll come up with its own default values. This is not by any means a standard of looking at things, but I think it's really cool to help us see the model of the DOM. So if you look at this, you can see that I have my HTML up here. and it starts my whole tree. So HTML goes down to head, and then you can see my head, I've got a comment. It even picks up the comment. See all these text nodes? These can be white space. It'll pick up everything in the DOM and actually make it an object. And then within these body tags, you can see we have a div container, we have comments, we have text, we have all these different things. So all this stuff is a great visualization of what the tree looks like and how it functions. I just really like this. It's nice to see that if you change a value. Now the problem with this tool is if you try to hit delete, it does weird stuff like that. It doesn't make any sense at all. So, and it didn't look like that even 2 weeks ago. So I recommend you copy and paste things in and don't edit here if you want to mess around with this tree. But if we were to like refresh this page and put in some, like I'm going to put in a whole page of content. So I've prepared a whole page of content here. We can see how crazy this tree can get. So pretty cool. We can see how big this tree can grow and how many elements are being accessed. So when you try to access an element that's way, way, way down deep right here, now you can see when we're talking about being too specific or we're accessing an element that's too far down the tree, this takes a lot of effort for the browser to go down all these trees and find just the right one. So that's a good visualization of that as well. I thought that was pretty cool. Any questions on the document object model as far as everything I've just talked about? Arthur says, hey, side question, wasn't the boot camp extended to 30 weeks to make up for the holidays, or is it more content? No, the 30 weeks is actually really cool, and you're going to experience it next week, where every 5 weeks we introduce a project where you are given no code, and we give you some design docs and some requirements and say, ready, go. So that's next week. Occasionally we'll have holiday days like yesterday, and we just got to do our best to make up the ground. There's just no way around it. Good question. That's the answer I can give you. Sam, DOM2 has been removed. I don't know. I'll go check it out. Don't worry, I'll get you the video. Any other questions? I know, I never thought I'd be sad about holidays. But I am here. Vim says, is there a way to tell a good DOM structure versus a not good structure? Well, first off, you need to make sure your HTML is valid, Vim. So one thing that is way back in week 1 is an HTML validator from the W3C. And so you can actually pop in your markup here. And if it is valid, so let's go pop in some markup just to see. Now, don't put in your document, only put things in between the body tag. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. So I'm going to hit check, put in some, okay, one error, 4 warnings. So if you look down here, try to find your error. Okay, no document type declaration. Oh, I guess I have to put in my doc type here. Kind of funny. Maybe I do have to put that in there. Let's see. There we go. No errors. So warnings, by the way, don't worry about warnings. They're just that. Some browsers freak out about them. But this is like where I go, Vim, to figure out, is my DOM structure valid? So HTML validator. That's the answer I would give you. Cam says, are text nodes, elements, or something different? Let's talk about that. So Cam's talking about the fact that when you go look up DOM on the internet, you hear, well, the DOM is all objects, and then you hear that there's elements, and then you hear that there are nodes. So the interesting thing about nodes is what we access through the DOM API. It's how we access things. So if I come in here, you will see that I have my element here, and it also has its own value, which is it's a node. It's one element, because you could have, what, 1,700 H1s, right? And so those would be 1,700 H1 elements. But the specific value of this one element is considered a node by the DOM. Does that make sense, Cam? I want to make sure that makes sense. Because that's a really good question. What's the difference between like a node and element? And the answer is elements are... I said, so the text link is different. Yes. Well, so each one of these individual elements is a node, like each individual one. But remember, the A tag is actually an element of the HTML. So We have to think about these things as elements are multiple things, and nodes are very specific things. Well, let's talk about how we can manipulate them directly. That's a nice segue. Cam says, how do we manipulate that directly, or just the element? Let's go start talking about how we can do that. So I'm going to open up CS11 DOM1. I'm going to give you this link. Everybody follow along with me if you will. Follow that link. This has already been saved into your guided demo. So we're going to start trying to manipulate some of the DOM using JavaScript. Because right now, of course, we could come in here and change things, but we're not doing it using JavaScript. Now remember, in Codepen, I took off the auto run feature, and you have to manually hit the run button. So if you try to follow along and you don't do that, you will have a bad time. So make sure you follow that guidance there. Okay. So that being understood, let's start looking at, and by the way, I'm pulling this right off the training kit. So if you feel like, wow, I'm not able to follow this, or where do you get that information? It's all off the training kit. I'm using it as my guide. So we're going to be talking about how we can actually get access to these elements on our page. So first off, I'm going to actually just set up a variable. So we'll say let, and I'm going to get all of the same tag elements. There's a lot of tag elements. So I'm going to say tag elements, and then I'm going to assign it the value of the document. So this is our document, right? Our document object model. So we have to access it first. And then we're going to use a method called get elements by tag name. Now that is a mouthful. And you might be going, how in the world am I supposed to memorize that? You're not. You're not. You're supposed to go to the documentation of the DOM, go look at properties and methods. And remember, that's where you can go if you ever get confused. So all these things are going to be here. All these things I'm typing. Now, do you need to memorize every one of these methods and properties to be a proper developer? Absolutely not. You just need to know where to go to find this information, and you probably should memorize a couple good things. And I'm going to talk about things that you should memorize versus things you don't need to. In this case, you don't need to memorize get elements by tag name, but it's a good example of how we can access all these values. So what we're going to do is let's get all the H1 tags on the page. So in this case, we have H1, H1. So what you do is you put inside of this invocation an H1, right? So this is going to grab all elements by the tag name. So let's console log this. So I'm going to say console.log. And in this case, I'm just going to say tag elements. And let's see what happens. All right, so I'm going to hit that run button. Remember, I got to do that. Codepen can't handle log, so we're going to go right to the proper log here. And you can see down here, when I log this is the same console, by the way, so we'll just get rid of this. Down here, you will see that I've got an HTML collection. What the heck is an HTML collection? Well, when you find something you don't know, HTML collection, remember, I like to type in MDN because they're one of the biggest resources of JavaScript. I would consider them where I go for all of my knowledge. HTML collection represents a generic collection. It's array-like, objects similar to arguments of elements in document order, and offers methods and properties for selecting from the list. Okay, that's a lot to take in, but I want you to think about this. It's not an array. It's array-like. That is something that people don't pick up. They look at that and they go, oh, it's just an array. I'm going, no, it's not, because you don't have the same methods. Like, you can't map and reduce and filter over that because it's an HTML collection. It's not an array. So just, you need to understand that that's something that's going to be a big gotcha. And we'll talk about that more on Wednesday, tomorrow. But for now, understand that you can have the length, which makes it feel like an array, right? Like, it kind of feels like an array. So if we come back to our code, and if we were to come in here and say tag elements.length, we run it. See how it says 2? So let's go ahead and make sure that we're not getting the wrong elements. Throw another one in there. Another H tag, H1 tag. Save it, run it, and it should say 3 if everything worked out. And it did. So it clearly is working. It is working in a way that feels like an array, but notice it only has 2 methods. These methods are worthless compared to what we can do with an array. So I want you to understand that HTML collection is not something that we want to work with a lot, and we will use a method to convert it into an array tomorrow. But for now, just understand that it's not truly an array. Vim says, so tags equal elements and tag names equal element names. Yeah, that's if you want to think of it that way, Vim. Tags and elements are used a lot of times as synonymous, but tags are the physical, like, syntax. I should say digital syntax of HTML and stuff. Elements are the DOM objects. Thomas says 2 is too long for Codepen to show in console. Yeah, I know. Codepen wasn't made for this specifically, so we'll just use the browser's power. Okay, so this is interesting. We're now actually selecting things. This is kind of cool. How do we actually get one of these items individually, though? Well, the array collection allows us to have array-like behavior, which adds to the confusion thinking it's an array. What I mean by that is, if I pop in an array here, if I wanted to select the first item in the array, what do I need to type right here? Robin, good job. So 0, because that is the first item in the index. So good job. I'm glad you guys didn't forget all this stuff over the weekend. So if we come in here and we run our code, look what happens. Hello there. It grabs our first H1. That's pretty cool. So now I'm going to come in here and say 1, and it should grab the second one. Yo, I'm the second H1. And then let's grab the third one just to confirm all this stuff. Aha, another H1 tag. So we've got all 3 of our tags now. So there we go. We can start manipulating and grabbing these things with our DOM. This is pretty cool. All right, so how can we actually change these things? Well, we can use properties now. Because we've been using methods of the DOM, now we can use some properties. So let's go back to that first item right there. And what you can actually do, this is new to you, unless you watch the videos, but you can type in inner HTML, just like that. Then you can use your assignment operator, and we can assign it to be something else. So we could say, what up, CS11. So then I'm going to go ahead and clear my console so we can see this. Now pay attention to this. So I'm going to hit save, run it. Cannot set property HTML undefined. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, did I write it wrong? Oh yeah, because I'm inside a console log. So let me get rid of my console log. Well, let's just write a new line. So the beautiful thing is I can now do this. I can say tag elements dot inner HTML, assign the value of what up CS11. That's a way better way of doing it, by the way, is by reference. Okay, so now let's try this again. Run it. Hello there, and then tag elements. Oh, I forgot to grab my my 0th index. Now let's try it again. There we go, my goodness. So you can see here what we're doing. We're grabbing the HTML collection. We're accessing the 0th position in the array. We're then using a property called inner HTML that's going to actually change the insides of the HTML to say, what up, CS11. So now if we were to actually inspect this element, you will see that the inside content of this element says, what up, CS11. Pretty cool. This is the beginnings of how we can manipulate the DOM using our JavaScript. So tag names are interesting, but they're very, very general. Just like in CSS, we learned about our stars, our universal selectors, and all our element selectors. The same problem exists here. It's too general. So we want to be more specific. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just comment this out. Let's introduce something a little bit more specific. So let's actually look at an ID. So down here, I have an example ID. So I'm inside the header of div. So it's this one right here, right? So now let's go down to our ID and let's make sure we can see it. So I'm going to go ahead and just reference it and say example ID, color, and then we'll just do like blue so we can make sure it sticks out. There we go. So in this case, now we've got my blue example ID. Let's make up a new variable. We'll just call it, test ID or whatever, just so we can grab it. We're going to assign it the value of, and now we're going to say document, and then we're going to introduce something new. We're going to say get element by ID. Oops. Now, the interesting thing about this is I don't need to worry about an array or a return of collection. It's just one element because the browser knows that the ID can only exist one time. So we don't have to worry about trying to get a collection or an array or anything. So in this case, let's get example ID. And then we'll just use the same kind of code. Now, here's the cool thing, guys. We're now using inner HTML with multiple selectors, right? So this is super nice because if you learn it once, it applies everywhere else. So we've got our reference to test ID. We're assigning it the value of an example ID, which is grabbing this ID. At that point, we are now saying, okay, reference, I want the inside of your HTML to say, I have updated an ID. Okay, so let's see if this thing works. Pay attention to the blue box. I have updated an ID. Sweet. So now we're able to be very specific with IDs. Now you can see why people like to use IDs when it comes to JavaScript, right? Because in CSS, I made you swear an oath that you wouldn't use IDs unless you needed to because they were so heavy on the specificity scale. Well, in JavaScript, the oath kind of laxes a little bit, but you have to understand that IDs are super valuable to be specific enough. And you don't have to go and go through an HTML collection or anything. So IDs are very handy that way. But again, only one per page. So they really don't do a great job. And I still don't use IDs a lot. David says, so in JavaScript, is it best practice to use IDs or should we still try to avoid them? It really depends on where you work, David. It really depends. If you worked with me, I would try to have you avoid IDs at all costs because of specificity, and I would focus on more specific class names. So if you worked with me, no IDs. If you worked with somebody else, probably IDs. So Adrian says, hey, could we change the color? We can. We'll get to that in a little bit. David says, oh, so sibling selectors work in the JavaScript part? Yes. We can actually use sibling selectors. Pretty cool. So let's go look at some of these different things, though. I love that you guys are asking these questions. This is really good. So we got elements by class name. Let's look at the next thing that we can do. Let's get, or sorry, we got elements by tag name. Let's do elements by class name. So we'll just say class elements. We'll assign it the value of document dot. You see the pattern here? Are you guys seeing this? We're using document every time. So this is our API reference. Like we're actually accessing something that exists outside of JavaScript. We're saying document dot, and we're going to say get elements by class name. So this is going to return an HTML collection of classes, just like our elements did, but now they're going to be classes. So, oops. Because we know it's going to be classes, we don't have to do dot. So let's go find out where we have multiple classes. So example class, example class, example class. So it looks like they're on our p tags. So let's go in here and say example class, just like that. So in this case, now that we have our test class, let's go look at this. Console.log class elements. Let's see how many things are inside of this array or this HTML collection. So I'm going to hit save. So if you're following along, you have it. I'm going to hit run. Sweet, look at this. So now we have an HTML collection, and it gave us 3 items, and it's all the items with our example class. Pretty cool. And those of you that are paying close attention, look at the proto link. It's pointing back to an HTML collection. So it really is not an array. It's pretty cool. Any questions on anything we've talked about as far as getting the reference? Anything that is not making sense at this point? I want to do a little knowledge check here. I'm seeing a couple people type. Vim's typing. So Vim says, does HTML collection inherit from array? Well, let's find out. All right, open this up. It inherits from object. So it's a special object called an HTML collection. Pretty cool. Okay, if there are no other questions, let's take a look at the new abilities that we have with ES6. So these things were kind of old. I did these a long time ago, and the cross-browser compatibility didn't work all the time, and it was super frustrating. And so lately, our new browsers have come with new tools that we can use, and these tools are way more intuitive, I think. So let's talk about query selector. So I'm going to say let, and then we'll just do my selection. Now we're going to assign the value of the same old thing, document dot, right? But now we're going to use a thing called query selector. So it's query selector. Now query selector is interesting because it can accept both an ID or a class. And so we can actually come in here, and let's say we wanted to test this out by looking at the class first. So inside of here, the nuance here is that you have to actually reference the CSS selector. So I have to say hash for my ID, and I'm going to go grab my example ID. I'm trying to make this smaller, sorry. So you can see right here, I'm just going to grab this example ID to show you. Example ID. So now let's log out my selection. All right. Clear this so we can see everything, save it, and run it. Awesome. Check it out. I have updated an ID. So query selector is allowing us to access IDs by using the hash. Now we can go in here and use the dot, and we can get our example classes to prove that the query selector can do both. So we'll just save and run. And look at that. It's got our HTML collection of our 3 items. Doop, doop, doop. So I want you guys to understand what's going on here is that query selector is no respecter of IDs or classes. It just grabs a list of them, and away you go. So let's go look at what query selector actually does, though. So query selector MDN. So it returns the first element within the document that matches the specified selector or group of selectors. If no matches are found, null is returned. So it's a little bit more specific. It's going to grab that first element it finds with the matched name. So you can see how this could be really valuable. So like, to answer your question even more, David, this is why I don't use IDs, because now I can use class names that are super specific, and query selector is the equivalent of doing that for me. But just in case I want to select more, well, guess what? There's another thing called query selector all that allows us to grab all classes and returns that. So query selector is the new get element by ID, if you will, but you can use classes. So it's super nice. It's very specific and allows you to avoid using IDs if you don't want to use them in your code. So query selector is the bee's knees. This is the thing that most developers are using. But if you need to select all the elements matching, you should use query selector all instead. So let's go take a look at that. So if we come over here, whoops. So query selector is getting that first element, right? So now let's just copy this to save a little bit of time here. And we'll say my multiple selections. And then we'll say query selector all. So now what we're going to do, and I'm going to comment these out so we don't get a million consoles. Make sure they're all gone. Okay. Save it. And then let's come down here. So now we're going to say, let my multiple selectors assign the value of document query selector all. And then we'll just console log out the results of my multiple selection. All right, I'm going to save it. Let's go ahead and pay attention to our console that's empty right now. Run it. Check it out. Something new happened, though. We now have a new thing. So in this case, we have a node list. And you're going, what the heck? We just looked at HTML collections. What's a node list? Well, it is a literal list of nodes that have been returned by query selector all. So node lists are similar to HTML collections, but they have their own methods. So if we look at node list, objects are collections of nodes, such as though returned by properties, such as node, child nodes, blah, blah, blah. So let's go see why these are unique. They actually have a couple more methods. So node lists come pre-baked with more array-like methods. But you'll notice that it has key values because it's still iterating through an object. Again, we're going to talk about this tomorrow and why it's kind of obsolete, because we can use an ES6 method called array from, which will turn anything into an array. So just know that I want you to know, like if someone were to interview you and say, what's the difference between an HTML collection and a node list? Your response would be, node lists have more methods and more abilities than an HTML collection, right? But as far as the properties go, they have the same property, which is just .length. Do you need to know this for an interview? Potentially, potentially not, because you're going to turn everything into an array anyway when you start coding for real. So if we come into this, keep clicking that for some reason. If we come back into this, we can now see our node list. And if we look at node list, it just inherits from our proto object, so it's just one removed. Cam makes a really good comment. He says, node lists are static, right? Whereas HTML collections are live. That is true. But that is beyond where I want to go right now. So if what Cam just said sounds interesting, go Google that, because it is pretty cool. But ultimately, we will convert everything into an array. So kind of becomes a moot point. In this case, we've now looked at basically everything we'll ever have you do to make a reference. I want you guys to play around with this for a couple minutes, though, get some hands on keyboards. So what I've done is I've got a little, where'd it go? Maybe it's over here. I had a little example I wanted you guys to work on today. It's probably in my collections under DOM. There it is. Okay. So I'm going to give you like 7 minutes because this is brand new. I just want you to update each value with the new content, like just with new content. Just make up stuff using the DOM only. So no HTML, right? Just JavaScript only. I want you to update this. I'm going to kill the console. There we go. Now you can see everything. So I'm going to give you this. Now remember, I've got it up to run and save. I don't know if that feature comes over when I paste it to you. So let me know if it doesn't or not. But I want you to take that little DOM practice challenge, and I want you to change every one of these values based on the things that we just talked about. Okay, I'm going to give you 7 minutes to do that. Start now if you have it. 7 minutes, ready, steady, go. And I'm going to change the screen so you can see how much time you got left. I don't expect you to get all the way through it. Just get as much as you can done. Okay? All right. Okay, let's see how far you guys got. I'd like to see some examples. So I'm going to put a thread in here and just say example thread in Slack. Go ahead and pop in a couple of your Codepen links. Remember, you had to fork and save it if you want me to see it. Anybody want to pop anything in there they want to look at? While I wait for that, let me point my screen over back to my code. I want to talk about something interesting here. So in this case, with a query selector, you'll see that I have let my selection document, and then I can do anything at this point. I can grab anything. I want to make sure, maybe it wasn't clear enough, you can grab anything that you can grab in CSS. So for example, I can grab H2s. So if I come in here and I run it, there it is. I'm a nested H2. If I come in here and I do a chain, I could do this. I could say class H2. Now, what's it going to grab? What's it going to grab, everybody? What do you think it's going to grab? If I did this with this current line, when I console log, what's it going to say? Daniel nailed it. He said the first class, the H2. That's because query selector is the first element that runs across that meets this criteria. So if I hit run, it's the same thing. If I wanted to get the second item, well, then I'm kind of in some trouble because I'm not using query selector all. I don't have any indices to act. So I can come in here and say class, and I could say, you know, more specific, whatever, just to be super literal. And then I could come in here and I can actually reference that chain like that. So query selector is super powerful. So let's see if that works. Run it. There it is. It grabs the second one. So this is what I mean by you don't have to use IDs if you don't want to. If you know what you're doing with your query selectors. Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of links come into the thread that I asked for. So here, David popped one in. Let's take a look. Let's see here. Where did that one go? All right, it's over here. So David, thank you for volunteering your code. Okay, so it looks like we've got David went in here and said document Gelma ID, change the inner HTML to paragraph changed, and lo and behold, it did. So there we go. I don't know if you have more than that, David. I'm assuming you thought you did, maybe. Maybe you didn't save. Aha, there we go. So David said, I only actually changed one element, but I found a way to rewrite it without any let keywords. So you just went right directly on the document. Okay, let's look at what Vu did. Here's Vu's example. All right, so Vu used a combination of query selector and query selector all. Very cool. So notice that what he did in here is that we have Vu went in with 1, 1, 2, 3 in the indice positions with the query select all. Pretty smart. I like that approach. So that looks really cool. Nice work, Vu. Just for time, let's see, Robin. Let's see what Robin's got, and then this will be our last one. All right, so Robin came in here. She used a query selector, went right with the ID. Now, interestingly enough, if we look at the collection, if we look at the console, and we run this, let's see, it's probably freaking out under the hood. So document.querySelectory is not a function. Ah, there we go. There's an extra Y there. I was wondering what's going on. So in this case, this is actually a good example to call this out because remember, we need to make sure we reference the actual hash when we use query selector. So I appreciate you putting your code up because it's actually a great learning lesson here. Because now we know that we have to make sure we can't have query selector with a Y, of course, and then the hash on the ID is necessary so it knows where to go. Awesome. Great job here. Whoa, look at this though. We've got query selector all H2, and then we see a for each coming from our node list, and then we see an arrow function and it's logging the elements. Robin, what is, wow, okay. I see you, Robin. You're awesome. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. After the 5-minute break, we will summarize all of the DOM stuff, all of the selection stuff that we've talked about. We'll introduce a couple new manipulators, and then we'll get into events. Let's take a 5-minute break. Make sure you get away from your computer. Take a little break here. No, Robin. Robin says, is that the wrong way to do it? I'm just saying that's very impressive. Very impressive that you thought to loop through it and not just statically introduce each one. So color me impressed, Robin. Okay, I'm going to change my screen to the counter. Take a break. Stand up. Get away from the computer. Get that blood flowing. Get some water, and then we'll come back. Okay, welcome back from your break. Thank you for getting away from your computer for a little bit. It's helpful to keep those brain juices flowing. All right, let's come back to the final thoughts here. So just a review of what we were covering. You should have been able to explain what the DOM is and how it relates to an HTML page. So at this point, I think you would say, well, the DOM is an API. It's the bridge that connects the JavaScript and the HTML together. So that would be a valid response. Use DOM selectors to select elements on a page and describe the difference in the behavior of each. So we've done query selector, all, query selector, get elements by tag name. By the way, those are not obsolete. It's just use case is really high with query selector. You can pretty much do anything you want, right? So that's why I told you that that was a popular one. The combination of query selector and query selector all are kind of the de facto. And then use different properties and methods to manipulate a selected element. So we've done a couple of those things, but there's more, way more we can do than just inner HTML. And by the way, if we're talking about performance, inner HTML is not a great one if you just want to change the content. Text context would be the best one, but inner HTML is great if you want to replace the insides of that HTML. And it's used everywhere, so you need to understand it. Attributes are also used everywhere, and you'll want to manipulate and update those attributes as well as style. So the hard thing is today is time. We're trying to jam in 2 days into one. So I want to talk about specifically style and set attribute. We'll go over examples of those. I want you to read about class name, ID, class list. I want you to read about append child and pre-append child, children, and parent nodes on your own time, okay? So make sure you go Google and read these right out of the MDN. For today's limited time, I'm going to showcase style and set attribute before we move on to the next topic. So without further ado, let's go back to our practice pad here. So again, I'm going to comment out my console log. Logs, by the way, they take quite a bit of memory over time, and they kind of expose the inner workings of your app. So make sure you mind your loggers. Watch what your loggers are doing and know when they're available. Comment them out if they are. Okay, so let's talk about setting attributes and what that entails for us. So let's say that we have an image tag, which we do. Some image, right? And right now it's broken. There is no source. And the alt tag, we don't have an alt tag in there. So let's go add an alt tag first and see what we can do. So first off, if we wanted to grab this, we know that we could use some-image as a nice hook or reference into what we want to do. So I'm going to say let my image assign the value of document.query selector. So nothing new here. And then we're going to make sure we say some image and make sure we reference that it's a class. Now, yes, you could make a case and say, Josh, there's only one image on the page. You could just use image, img, the tag. But let's pretend we're going to have multiple images. Classes are safer that way. So in this case, let's make sure that we're actually getting what we think we're going to get. So I'm going to say console log my image. And by the way, this is how I work all the time. It's in HTML, I introduce you to the red bordered 1 pixel red border. This is the same way I do this in JavaScript, as you've seen over the last couple weeks now. I love to make sure I'm logging these things out because you just never know what you're missing. It could be one extra letter. Okay, so there we are. We can see that we have our some image getting, and it looks like another log is being produced somewhere. Aha, there it is. Got to mind your loggers. So if we come down here, hit run again, let's make sure that we only see some image, and there we go. So I want you to notice something interesting. Down here it says source unknown, and the alt tag is just naked, doesn't have anything inside of it. So these will not help us with our image. So let's say that we had a dynamic image that was loaded from a database. That's the kind of scenario that you would be doing this. Well, let's go and access the attribute. So here's how we do it. We can say my image, so we get our reference. I just want you guys to keep thinking about that. We're getting a reference. Now we're going to say set attribute. So that seems pretty sensical. And then inside of set attribute, first we're going to come in here and we're going to say, well, what is the attribute we need to set? So let's do the alt first, alt tag. Sorry, the alt attribute. And in this alt attribute, we're going to do a comma, and then we're going to say what the image is. So I know I'm going to go get a kitty image. So I'm going to say this is a kitty. So notice what I've done. I've used the set attribute method, right? It's a method because we are invoking it on a property, or sorry, on an object here. I'm grabbing the alt tag. Sorry, I don't know why I went single quotes when I've been doing doubles all day. Let's just keep being consistent. Doesn't matter though. Now I'm going to go ahead and save. And what I'm going to do is going to console log now. Well, actually, we don't have to console log. We can just see the attribute change. So let's go ahead and run it. And then we'll log the image under it after we ran it. Aha, there it is. Alt tag. This is a kitty. And you can see now that Chrome is recognizing we have an alt tag and it's coming with its default values and showing a broken image and all that good stuff. So I've got a pre-built image that we can mess around with. Let's go put the source inside of here. So we're going to say my image. All right, we're going to reference it. And now we're going to say set attribute. Again. So what am I going to put in here as, what's my first value? What is the first value that I want to manipulate? Source. Good job. Just want to see if you guys are awake. Pass in my kitty pixel thing. And then now let's run this. Now we should see a big old kitty face if it worked. What up? So in this case, we can now see that the source was updated with the value and the alt tag is now this is a kitty. So set attribute allows us to do that. We can also get the attribute if we were trying to figure out what an attribute was. So we could say my image get attribute. And we could say source just to say what is the attribute. Save it, run it, watch the log down here. And it's saying, hey, look, this is what you asked for. So these are pretty cool. Get, I'm not using every day. Set, I will be using if I need to be setting images. So understand that we are setting two different attributes here. We're using the alt tag and the source tag. We're referencing them at different points and giving them different values. All right, so that is how we can set attributes. Now, in our ES6, we can actually do this even easier. We can use a shorthand. So we could say my image dot. We can actually just go right to the attribute because it's a common one. And we can just actually just give it a source right from the beginning. So we could take kitty, pop in our string, comment this one out, see if it works. And kitty's still there. So you might be going, wait a second, that seems way easier. Why would I not do that every time? Well, it just depends on who you're working with and what code base you're working with. I like to use this, super short and succinct. You can do it with the alt tag as well. But then we'll have custom attributes as well we'll introduce tomorrow. And then set attribute works. And dot syntax also works. So the dot syntax, by the way, allows you to access the attribute of an element, always. So there you go, pretty cool. Let's see, any questions about this? Any questions or concerns about what you just saw with the setting of a source attribute? Okay, while you're asking questions, I'm going to move down to doing some other cool stuff like setting styles now. So let's go back to something we've already made a selection of. Let's do like my selection here. So remember, my selection got the first class that was example class. So let's just keep that in our heads. So now what we can do is we can do style. So we can actually grab style And it's pretty crazy because now we can actually type .css text, and we can actually update our text colors this way, or we could do any kind of CSS that we want. So now I'm going to come in here and we'll just say color red, and then let's see what happens. So I'm going to save it, run it. Aha, there we go. So now our first example class turned red. So notice the combination here that we're using style dot. So if we go look at this, so JS style MDN, it's just a property of HTML element. So it's a style property. But you'll notice that there's all these different properties that we're looking at. So style should not be set by assigning a string directly to style property, since it's considered read-only as the style attribute runs a CSS style declaration. This is a lot of stuff. But if you look down here, we can use either set attribute, like we've already learned, because style is just an attribute, right? That's all it is on an inline element. So we can use our old style attribute that we already learned, or we can do style.css text or style.color. But in this case, this would allow us to manipulate a lot of different things. But it can be a little tricky trying to learn all the style dots. So for example, like if you wanted to display flex on something, you could use style.display, assign the value of flex. But wouldn't it be easier just to say style, set attribute style display flex? So that's another reason that we would want to use our good friend set attribute. Now, some of you might be going, whoa, ho, ho, why are we using JavaScript to set our CSS? You had talked about separation of concerns last couple of weeks. All these things are true. It just depends on what kind of paradigm you're trying to program in. So we're going to be talking about functional paradigms tomorrow. We're going to be talking about building, composing components together, and the beginnings of what you will understand to be React in a couple of weeks. And within React, we'll use JavaScript a lot to do a lot of same things that we did in CSS. But for like the last 3 years, I've been programming in all these frameworks, and I've been using preprocessors the whole time as well. So they're all still there. They all work together. It just depends on who you're working with and what project it is. Okay, Libby says, when writing code, would you want to match up your JS tags to match the HTML names? For example, if the HTML is already set, and you were just altering the JS, would you want to say let some image, assign the value of document query selector some image, or does that not matter? It doesn't matter, but naming convention for the next developer does matter, right, Libby? So remember, I've tried to train us, tried to have us think in this way. Always try to program for the next developer that's going to work on your code. Try to make sure that you're writing in a way that the next person that reads your code can understand it and consume it and change it. It's the developers that try to be so freaking clever that shoot every other developer in the foot, and I hate it. I've been CTO, manager, senior developer, many different roles, and no matter what, in every role I've been in, the developers that thought they could be so clever shot the next developer in the foot for hours. So make sure you are thinking like, what is the next person? What are they going to be doing when they see my code? Are they going to, is this unique, weird name I made going to make sense? And the answer is usually no if you have to ask that question. So be robust, be verbose, because we have these awesome tools that allow us to minify everything. Robin says, isn't there a convention standard that makes it difficult to do that? Not really. Like what I mean by this is like, what if I came in here and instead of multiple selection, I was like MS, right? A lot of developers do this, unfortunately. They're like, well, I know it means multiple selection. And you should just garner from the fact that query selector all is grabbing every selection. So clearly it is multiple selection. Like that's what I mean by that. You just think about the next developer. They don't know how to read your mind. So be almost too verbose in some ways, because we have minifiers, we have uglifiers that can actually turn these into variables when you output. And it doesn't even matter how long you named it. We have technology for that. So don't stress. Just think about what's the next developer going to be. Are they going to be able to understand my code? I try to write for the next developer. Okay. That being understood, let's transition over to events. Are there any final questions on like DOM references? Anything I can answer, anything that's like itching your brain, you're going, if I could just ask this question, it would really help. I don't see anybody typing, so I'll move on to events. But if you do have anything, feel free to talk to your project managers or DM me directly. All right, let's jump over now to DOM2. So here's the link for that. We're going to separate these because I want you to understand that this was referencing and building the selector and accessing the DOM and manipulating the DOM. And now we're going to jump over to events and try to figure out what those look like and how they function. Because at this point, you've got some experience now and understanding of how we can access the document object model. Well, that's cool, and we can change text, but now I want to actually change something when an event fires, when something actually occurs. So in this case, let's build out our selectors again and start trying to select some of these things. So let's grab the H1 first. So we'll say let, and then we could just say, product header or something. Assign the value of document.get. Oops. Trying to use my own brain here, and it's not working. Query selector. And then within this query selector, we'll just grab either the H1 because it's the only thing alone, and that's fine. Or we could do something like this. We could say container H1 if we wanted to be specific. This does cost a little bit more, by the way, because you have to traverse the DOM more. But it gets the job done. We'll come in here and we'll say console.log. And we'll get our reference. Product header. Now I think this can log. Let's see. Can you do this, Codepen? Aha, it's been logging. Sweet. I'm going to transition this over to the behavior of not auto updating so we can control that ready button, that run button. I'm going to hit save. So now you should be able to see everything I just wrote if you're following along. All right, at this point, we know this stuff. It's kind of boring. We're like, okay, we get it. Give me something new. All right, well, here we go. We're going to start adding event listeners to our references. What? This is crazy. So now we can say product header. So here's our product header. It's grabbing our container H1. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say add event listener. Now remember, this is all part of the DOM API. This is all part of what we're doing. It's right there with it. It's just a method that we can access. And so within this event listener, we can actually use the DOM's API to figure out what to put inside of here. Now I'm just going to write one out for us, and then we'll dissect this and see how it works. So in this case, we're going to have click inside of a string right there, okay? Then we're going to pass in an event. Now in this case, it can be totally empty. I'll put a little E in here, just an event, just so we can actually see that there is an event getting passed in. I'm going to use a little arrow operator, because I'm not really worried about the this keyword, and I'll pass in this. Now this is weird syntax. You haven't really seen anything at this point, right? And you're going, okay, this is new. So let's just do an alert, see if everything worked, and we'll say, we'll just do a console. It's fine. Console.log, and we'll say, I clicked the H1. All right, let's see if this thing worked. So we're going to hit save. We're going to hit run. Now I'm going to click product. Sweet. And every time I click it, it fires an event. Awesome. A lot just went on here, though, under the hood. Okay. So what happened is we use this new thing called add event listener, which accepts a value of an event. So let's go look at that. Add event. Well, we'll just do DOM events. DOM events, MDN. By the way, this is all in your training kit. Event reference. So DOM events, there are many, many DOM events. Look at this. I'm just going to scroll for a second and let you think about, wow, that's a lot of events. There's so many events that can happen and fire off by the DOM. Okay, so this is a list of every event, at least in modern browsers, that we can access. Again, very overwhelming. But if you think about this, you're not doing all of these events all the time, or at least you're not building an app that's that crazy that listens to every event ever. And it would be very taxing, by the way, to listen to every event ever. So let's focus on mouse events for now. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like we have over like what looks like 15 mouse events here. So we can do a lot of different things with this mouse event. So we just did click. Well, let's go look at double click. So I know that if I just take this, put this in a string, it'll just work. So if we just say double click, now let's save it and run it. Now I'm going to single click, nothing happened. Single click, nothing happened. Double click. Aha, now it works. Pretty cool. So the actual interpreter in the browser is listening for these DOM events to fire. And every time we fire an event, it goes up the DOM tree, tells the DOM what's going on, and then goes back down the DOM tree. So let's look at how this actually can impact us. Let's look at a couple more events just to get our heads around this. We can do mouse over or mouse enter. So pointing device is moved onto the element that has the listener attached. So let's do mouse enter. And by the way, if you want to dig deep into every one of these, you just click and then you can see all these crazy things you can do and examples that go along with all these things. Okay. So we're just going to grab mouse over, save, run, clear my console, mouse over. There it is. Notice that if I mouse over here, it's still getting hit. Why is that? Anybody know why that is? Mark, thank you. Display block. Nice, David, Vim, Daniel. Yes, good job, team. So I'm very happy to see that you did not forget your basic CSS here. So if we inspect element and we hover over the element, we can see the box model does indeed show us that we have to be careful about where we put our events. Because if we're not careful about where we put our events, they can happen in places we don't expect, right? So think about these things when you're putting events on there. Now, we could approach this by putting CSS on the button. So we could say product only be a certain width, right? And then we could control where that click area is. So just understand that this is hovering over the block level element. Pretty cool. Okay. Let's see. Let's look at, I want to make sure we cover enough ground. Let's talk about stuff that actually matters beyond just console logging, right? So if we came in here and we passed in this event, now remember, this event, I haven't talked about it yet. This event is passing in what is actually happening. Now, if I didn't have an event here and it was just a method, it's still, let's see, run it, clear it, run. It's still working, okay? So the event, I'm not even using the event in any way. And I'll talk about this a little bit here because the event is, this is covered deeply in the video that I made, but go watch that if you want to go crazy with the event. We'll come back to it in a second. But in this case, I just want to show you don't even need that. What we do need, though, is we need some kind of function to run when this event is triggered. Now, I'm using an arrow function because that's crazy tiny, and I don't care about the this keyword. So that's why, in this case, the arrow function is a great option. Otherwise, you could call a robust function. You could even call a function that was specified somewhere else. I want to make sure that you understand that this section right here is just reserved for a function name. So if we go look at add event listener, if we go look at this together, you will see that right here it has, you can put in the type of event listener that it is, and then the listener. So in this case, the method that we want to run, or the function that we want to run. So the object which receives a notification. So events are crazy, crazy powerful, and they allow us to manipulate the DOM in ways that we couldn't do even yesterday or last week. Like we can actually change content now when events fire. So let's go change some content when an event fires. Oh, see a question. So Robin says, what happens when events all occur up the chain, like from child to parent? Awesome observation, Robin. So in this case, we have an H1 that has the event on it. When it fires, it actually fires on every event, on every element on the outside of that element as well. So even though it's only getting triggered here, the container has a listener on it. And if that listener hears the mouse over, it will fire as well. And so the event chain is called event propagation, is allowing us to have this. So let's go look at our documentation for this, or training kit here. So as we throw in our event propagation, we can actually use this method called stop propagation that allows us to stop that from happening. So there's your question, Robin. That's the answer to your question, Robin. But I'll more effectively visualize that in a second here. David says, with on-click on hover events, which part of our box model count as the element? Does the border, does the padding, does the margin? Great question. The element itself, let's go try it out. Let's go put it on product here. So with product, let's throw some CSS on here. And so we'll just say container H1. Oops. In this case, let's get the background so we can see it. Or let's just get the border on it. Border 1px solid red so we can see that baby. Oh yeah, I have to hit run because I got it stuck on run there. Let's see, what have I got? I got some errors here. Light is not defined. That seems like an old error. Let's see. Run it again. Okay, where's my border? What did I do wrong here? Container H1. Everything looks good to me, unless I spelled it wrong. Container. Oh yeah, H1's not a class. Derp. Okay, save, run. We should see our border pop in. There we go. So let's pay attention to when this mouse actually hits it. So there's nothing there. Border. So as soon as it hits any part of that box model, it's gonna trigger. So there you go, David. The box model triggers it. So let's add some more padding just to see if that's true. Padding, 30px. So now our product's gonna get way bigger after I hit run. So there's product. So we used padding now, and let's use margin actually. Let's get some margin out here because you're gonna find that margin's not gonna trigger. Let's see here. We need to have more margin between our elements here. Okay, so let's clear it. Mouse, so margin is clear and free. See how the margin does not trigger? So as soon as we hit, looks like border is when that thing's triggering. So there you go, Mark. Mark says, what if it's the margin? Nothing happens. So now we know it's going to be border in is when that trigger event occurs. Great question. Hopefully that clears up any questions you had, because there it is on display. The box model from border in looks like it's, well, you know what? Let's throw a big old border on here too to see if it's the border for real. Okay. Where'd my console go? Clear. It is border. Okay, sweet. So totally confirmed now. Hopefully I'm pleased. It's good to know these specifics. All right, so let's change some content when we do something. So in this case, let's go to JavaScript here. And so when we hover over product header, now we can manipulate some stuff, right? So let's say that we wanted to change the background color of the product header. So let's see what that looks like in normal CSS. So we'll just say background, and we'll just say gray, so we can see that thing change colors. Oh, it's an inline element. Let's see, background color, gray, and then we have to give it some width and a height probably to even see that. I wonder if my margin's jacking it up. What am I doing? Something's weird here. Background color, that should be triggering that. Let's get rid of our margin and padding. It's probably because I'm trying to do this on an H1 tag. I should be probably trying to do it on container. Let's see if container will change for me if I don't goof this up. Oh, duh. I always forget I got to hit that run button. I'm not used to this. I only do this for this week because I want to control it. So let's get rid of that. And then let's hit that run button because I always forget. There we go. My goodness. Thanks, guys. I just saw the chat, so I appreciate that. So in this case, we can now confirm that gray has changed. So does anybody know what we would type in here to get the color to change based on what we just talked about like 10 minutes ago? Does anybody remember what we can do here? I see a bunch of people typing. Vu says set attribute. And then people are saying dot style, dot color. Interesting. Okay, let's try both. Let's see what they look like. So I would say product header, right? Because I want to reference it. I want to change it. And then in this case, some of you are saying style color. So let's try it out. Style dot color. And then we'll say, what was it? Color red or whatever. Save it, run it, hover it. So it didn't work because we have to probably just call the, oh, we don't want to put color inside it. We're being so specific. Save it, run it, hover it. There we go. It turned red. That's pretty cool. So notice one of the weaknesses of being super explicit here. We can't just randomly change whatever we want at this point, right? We would have to actually reference the CSS. Jameson says, hey, why not use hover in CSS? Well, Jameson, you're 100% right. And we're just messing around here. We could even say double click to make you happy. I'm all about making everybody happy. So in this case, let's just change it to red on a double click. So we'll run it. Hover no longer works. Double click, red. Happy? It's interesting. Why would you use hover in JavaScript and not the native browser pseudo classes? Well, there are cases in which you must use JavaScript. They are very fringe, though. And so more often than not, you should be using your pseudo selectors to do everything with CSS. But there are no double-click pseudo selectors, so this is a way better example. So let's change somebody else's content with an event. So now let's go into, let's make a new reference, and let's change some product information in a p tag. So we'll come in here and we'll say product p tag. And then we'll just do this to save some time. And then we'll grab our container and then we'll do the p tag. So we have our selector. And now let's grab our product p tag and change it red on a double click. So I'm going to hit save, hit run. Now if I double click here, this should turn red if everything worked. Double click, turned red. Awesome. So we could do some crazy stuff with this though. We could change colors, we could change font sizes. Daniel says, hey, can we change the inner HTML? We totally can. So let's try it out. Let's go in here. Product p tag reference. We'll then say inner HTML, HRML, HTML. Assign the value of what up, Dan? All right, so let's see. What do you guys think, by the way, before I run this? Do you think that it's going to say what up, Dan, and turn red? Or is it just going to stop at what up, Dan? What do you guys think? Say both or just one? So everybody's saying, I think it'll do both. Let's try it out. Okay. By the way, I like to work this way. Sometimes you guys say, how do you think? How do you work? How do you program? I like to assume things will do a certain thing before I hit the run button, because then it really solidifies my knowledge. Because then you go, okay, that's why it didn't work. So let's try it out. Let's hit run. So we are theorizing here that this p tag will change to say, what up, Dan, and go red on a double click. Double click. What up, Dan? And it's red. So good job, everybody. That's because we're not using a return statement, right? So with a return statement, it would kill everything. But because we're just procedurally going through and updating the DOM, it's going to perform everything we do. So great question there, Dan. And now you see the answer. We have inner HTML combined with style. Now we're cooking with some DOM manipulation gas here. We can do some really cool stuff with this. Okay, at this point, I want you guys to try it out on your own as well. So given this link right here, I'm going to go ahead and fork this. I'm going to call this CM2 DOM, and then we're going to say practice. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I want you just to write this stuff out yourself, the event listener. So I'm going to kill it for our practice session. You can keep these selectors if you want. Actually, you know what? No, you got to do everything. I really want you guys to understand this stuff. So at this point, you've got some derpy CSS, some HTML to work with. What I want you to do is play around with these events, and then at the end, we'll give you 7 minutes to do so. At the end of the 7 minutes, I'm going to ask for a couple examples and see what you came up with. So here is what I'm going to give you. Practice with this for 7 minutes, and then we'll come back and see what you guys came up with. Ready, go. All right, time is up. Go ahead and post your examples here for DOM2. Inside that thread would be very helpful. Here, please. Thank you, Daniel. So let's take a look at what Daniel did, and then let's see. Oh, we're on the wrong screen. This is the timer screen. Let me bring it over to our main screen, where we'll talk about event propagation after this. All right, let's see what Daniel did. So in this case, let date. So date is a reference to document get element by ID date. So let's go find out where that is. There it is in the p tag. Inner HTML assign the value of the date method. Awesome. Capital D, because you're using that constructor. It's constructing a new date. And then in this case, you're going to say document get element by ID button, add event listener, click the date. And then we're going to run date. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Run it. Button. Is that changing anything there? I don't see this changing anything. Is yours changing, Daniel? Did I miss something? I see what you're trying to do here, though. Oh, okay. Let's see. No, I don't see an answer from you. Because in this case, you're trying to run a new date. It should be, well, maybe I have to run it every time. No, it should run. Interesting. Yeah, Simon, the answer should be, well, it should be a new date, but you'd have to make sure it targeted and updated this value, right? So you probably want to run a function in here that would update that date. So that's something you can keep working on, Daniel. But I love what you're doing here. You put the date right in there. I see where your brain's at. It's awesome. Okay, let's see. I'm seeing after Daniel, see David put one in. Okay, so David's got the P and the H1, adding and click, P tag style, assign the value of product style. Okay, I like that. And product style is saying P tag inner HTML, yo, yo, yo. Okay, that sounds fun. Let's try this out. So add event listener on product, click. There it goes, yo, 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 yo. Nicely done, sir. All right, Simon, see what you got. Oh, shoot, looks like it's a link to the original link. Simon. So if you want to get another one in there, sure. William. Okay, so William's got our two selectors, two references up here, button and container H1. And then he's got an event listener, and then he's running an if statement. So inside the if statement, he's saying if the button's inner HTML says by now, then button HTML, click again. Style red and inner HTML, no, click it back. Else if the button inner HTML says click again. Button inner HTML, by now, black product. Cool, okay, let's try it out. So in this case, we need to click the button click. So this one. No, wait, click back, click again. Nice. So you custom built a toggler. Very cool. Nice job, William. All right. That was awesome. I don't have time to go over any more examples, but that was really good. Thank you for submitting them. If you really want me to see it, just DM me and I'll take a look. David says none of my styles changed. I have no idea why. Okay, so if we go back to David's. So in this case, style, you assigned it to product.style. And product.style is a property of product that we can manipulate, but it's not actively holding a style inside of it. So you'd have to put in some style here, right? And you'd have to style something. Like you'd have to say like color and then like red for that to change. So then if we ran it and we did p tag, see, there we go. Okay, sweet. Good question. Let's see here. Great job, everyone. So let's dig deeper on events really quick. Now that you've played with them a little bit and have had some experience with them, this is what's really going on under the hood. This is right from the W3. This is like the actual documentation. I don't recommend you go here because, well, I'll show you in a second why it's so crazy. I do recommend you look at it, but unless you're really into reading dictionaries. So in this case, there's 3 phases. The first phase is capturing. So it's going to actually capture the event. So remember this DOM visualization tool? Well, as soon as we go down multiple levels deep, every one of these little gray lines is connecting a dot, right? It's connecting an inheritance, if you will, to the DOM model. Well, that has to capture all the way down from the window, like from the actual document object, down to the very node that it's going to work on. At that point, it then targets a certain node, and that targeting happens depending on how we wrote our event listener, right? So if we said add event listener, where is it? Where did it go? Well, I guess I'll just go to my recent pens. 1 second, sorry about that. Looks like I shut it down on accident. Must be in my normal pens. CS2 DOM2, CS11 DOM2. Okay, I'll make sure I add this to collections so I don't forget. So in this case, that targeting is happening right there. It's traversing, so capturing phase is this, right? It's got to go and get that reference. Then we're referencing whatever we want to click. And then we're actually adding the event listener. So this is the targeting part. And then it bubbles up. And this was actually designed behavior when they built JavaScript. The engine takes up every piece and says, hey, do you want to do anything with this? Do you want to do anything with this? Do you want to do anything? You get the idea, right? And so what it does is it on purpose bubbles up just in case you want to trigger multiple things on one event. So these are the 3 phases. This is the propagation of an event bubble. Now, why is this important to you? Well, it matters because if you don't understand that the bubbling is occurring, you might accidentally trigger events on other events. So I'm going to show you something really cool. This website right here, it's called JavaScript Info. It's probably one of my favorite websites. It's made by a bunch of Russian people. And these Russian guys got together and they were like, the documentation for JavaScript in general sucks. We're gonna write it with the community. So I really like JavaScript.info. I love that what they're doing, and they're trying to basically make what MDN, because MDN I think is not super helpful sometimes. It's like super specific. I think JavaScript Info does a better job of describing things. So for example, JavaScript Info has a whole section on bubbling. And talks about this. Like we can actually take their code and try this out. But they're basically saying, if we go look at this, Plunker, shoot, I'm not sure how to use Plunker. Where's the run button? I probably shouldn't have come here since I don't know Plunker. But we could take this code with us to Codepen. And I'll show you exactly their example of the bubbling propagation. I think it does a great job of explaining it. Okay, so let's see here. We don't need doc type. We don't need HTML. We don't need body. We just need the insides. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to click. So I'll just save it as a generic thing. So notice that the form has onClick alert. The div has onClick. And I'll talk about these inline things for a second here. And then the p tag has onClick. So they have the same event firing. The same event is firing down that tree. So I want to show you that the p tag is on the inside. Okay, so I'm going to click the p tag and watch what happens. P, right? Okay. Oh, div. I didn't want that to happen. Oh, shoot, form. See what happened there? So all 3 of these, whether we knew it or not, now you know, are always listening for an event because it bubbles up. if you put an event listener on there, like on click. So by the way, this inline on click thing, it still has some prevalence to this day, but more often than not, you're going to see what we've been doing, which is over here are event listeners, right? Adding these event listeners. So if we were to nest the same kind of structure as this alert, like if we did double click, it would do the same kind of thing. Oh, are you not seeing, do you not see my page right now? Shoot. Oh, Zoom doesn't show the alerts. Okay, let me console log it. Thank you for telling me. Thanks, guys. Console. Oops, I got to do log. Console.log. Okay. Let me open up my console. Let me change it to the behavior so I know that it's running for sure. Run. Okay, now I'm going to hit the P tag and see how it does P, div, form in that order. So if you were to alert this, here, let me just show you. Let's just make this actually accessible. Sorry. Bubbling example for CS11. I'll save it, and then I'll change it back to alerts because I think the alerts do a better job of giving you that understanding of what's going on here. Why am I doing that? Z. Okay. So now I'm going to save it. I'm going to give you this link, and you can follow along with me. So follow that link, hit the run button, and then hit the P tag, and then you'll see the alerts pop up in the order in which they bubble. It's pretty cool. I think it really hits this point home. So yeah, so Robin says, so this needs stop propagation. It does need stop propagation if we don't want the next element to fire. By the way, this link I sent you guys, the JavaScript info, has an amazing examples of what propagation looks like, stopping bubbling, like doing all these different things. So go ahead and read this stuff. If you want more on this, go watch the video that I made for CS10. All right, guys, that is what you need to be successful for your assignments today. The combination of all the building your selector references and then your event listeners. So let's talk about what that looks like for you. I know that you have one day to work on this, okay? So don't worry, Sam, I'll get that up. Yeah, why is that video not showing? It should be showing. Airtable must not be triggering. Hold on. You know what's funny is Airtable is probably not listening to its events. So in this case, for project 1, I'm going to give you our good old friend, the Great Idea website. But this time, I've completely ripped out all the content. It's all gone. And so in this case, if you look at the index file, you've got the structure, but you have no content. And so what you need to do is you need to select every element and replace the content that didn't exist there before. So if you come into the, where is it? The JavaScript here, go into the data.js. Wait, I think that one was supposed to be gone. Shoot. If you go to the index.js, you will see I gave you a giant object. Okay, a giant JSON object, basically, that you can reference every single thing. Well, this isn't the Great Idea website, by the way. This has changed. It's now the DOM website. I mean, I could change things, but I'm laughing because it's the same thing. Like, no matter what you do, you can't escape it. So DOM is awesome. In this case, this is the solution. So you're going to get something that looks nothing like this. You're going to get something that has everything gone. And so you need to make it look like this by using your query selectors to update that. So, okay, what does that look like? Well, I gave you an example. Example, update the image source for the logo. So let logo, document, get element by ID, logo image. So I built my reference. And then I set the attribute of my source file to be the reference to my object. So I love this example because it forces you to think about bracket notation. So use bracket notation here if you don't want to die. Dot notation won't work with multiple names, different things. In this case, bracket notation does a great job in combination with the DOM. So in this case, I'm just setting the attribute. This is an example of how you could get it done. So this is just a ton of at-bats, okay? Like it's just a ton of at-bats. Get fingers on keyboards and get referencing all this content and plug it into the website. So that's assignment 1. Don't even look at the stretch. It's not worth it because you have to do assignment 2 today as well. Assignment 2 is going to be adding event listeners of your choice. So if we come in here, go to DOM2, look at our project. So basically, given this link, remember this link we talked about, this is all the events ever that you can do. I'm requiring you that you use 10 unique events. Okay? So mouse enter is 1, mouse over is 2, mouse move is 3. You see what I'm saying? Those are unique events. So I want you to demonstrate knowledge of 10 events and just get some at-bats, get some practice of writing these events. Now, normally, if we had a full afternoon to do this, I would expect you to kind of cruise through this part and get to the stretch goal. Because we're combining both assignments 1 and assignments 2 into one day, I'll be very pleased if you got assignment project 1 done and a project 2 done as well. But even then, I have realistic expectations that you might not get there. But understand that I think you can. I think you can because of the stuff we just learned. Again, avoid the stretch assignments unless you've just destroyed this. And in fact, a stretch assignment is different than a stretch task. If you're really interested in animation, which I am, GreenSock is the best library, in my opinion, out there. It destroys 3JS. It destroys all the other cool ones out there for simplicity and use. It's amazing. I've given a little demo of Brown Bag on it. It's been recorded, and it should be in the training kit somewhere. I'll make sure that gets brought up. But if you cruise through this stuff, I actually want you to look at GreenSock first before you go look at the stretch assignment. That's how much I think GreenSock's going to benefit you in your career, especially next week. Next week, one of the stretch goals is to be using GreenSock as well. So yeah, I'll get you that Brown Bag that I recorded for GreenSock, and it's an introduction to how to use it. It's super cool. So that's the game plan. So you're going to take project 1 that you built, and then you're going to use it to add 10 event listeners to the stuff that you brought in. So it works together really nicely for a one-day project. Yes, you can touch. Daniel says, can we touch the HTML? Absolutely. For project 2. Project 1 is the only time, I want to be super clear. Project 1 is the only time that I don't want you to touch the HTML because I want you to use JavaScript only to update the DOM. This is the only time I've ever said that. So project 1, don't touch the HTML2 or HTML. Project 2, you can manipulate whatever you want, even though it's the same project. JJ says, hey, are we doing separate pull requests, one for each project? Great question. I would say, in a perfect world, I would just have you do branches. I don't know if you guys know how to do branches yet, though. Because branches would be awesome if you could do DOM 1 branch, DOM 2 branch. I don't know how you guys feel about branching, though, and Git. So I'll leave that up to your project manager. That's something that I just didn't think about as a logistic thing today. Again, this doesn't usually happen. I don't usually lose a Monday, so sorry about that. But to make it super easy, I think just communicating with your project manager and let them tell you how they want it, because they're the ones that need to see it. If I were you, I'd probably make a brand new project for each one, though. But If I were you, I'd actually make branches. I'd do a branch that was DOM 1 and a branch that was DOM 2. Oh, wow. Sam says he finished the DOM 1 stretch project over the weekend. Timer with bells and whistles. Nice. By the way, those stretches are meant for you to have fun. They're not required. So hopefully you had fun with that, Sam. That was a tough one. Mark says, and leave the master alone. Yeah, that's what I would do, Mark. So I'd pull down master, then branch, and then that's how I would do it. By the way, that's how everybody does it in the industry. Everybody, every company I've worked for long, since Git has been around, you take master, you make a branch out of your feature, you work on your branch, and then you make a pull request to the master. That is how the real world works all the time, every day. Well, depending on the company, of course, but in most small companies and big companies, branching is how you actually live. But again, if that sounds confusing, don't worry about that. Just clone and fork and get to work and then talk to your project manager and they'll help you figure it out. Let's see. Arthur, I'm not sure if he asked if they updated Git Bash. I'm not sure. But if they did, hopefully it was a cool update. Oh, guys, stop hating on the great idea. I forgot that it was here, to be honest. I wouldn't have said, this is the last time you see it. Tell you what, for the next cohort, maybe I'll try to change something so it doesn't say the great idea. But it's the same concepts. You're changing HTML. Don't hate. Don't hate. Okay. I think that's it. Thanks, Emmeline. She says, keep it. All right. Okay, guys, any questions about what I've told you to do this afternoon? Projects 1 and 2. I'm going to make sure I get those videos up so you can reference the deeper dive on the events. And of course, we'll get this video up as soon as we can. We're rushing through DOM and events today because we want to slow way down for functional paradigms tomorrow. Just understand that there is a method to my madness today. Because I feel like this actually goes really well together in one day, but it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. Okay, I'm not seeing you guys say anything. I assume you're doing okay. Brains are a little bit fried because we've covered a lot of ground, but understand that the expectations are really simple with the assignments. Update content with references and also use event listeners, 10 different ones. That's where it's hard. You got to be creative. Every cohort, everybody goes, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do after 3. So you have to be creative to get the 10. Yeah, Daniel says, so should we just copy our project files from 1 to 2? Project 2? Yes, that's exactly what you should do. Okay, my friends, welcome back. Welcome back to another week of Lambda. I will see you tomorrow where we will talk about functional paradigms and extending our knowledge of objects to be used with the DOM. What? So now we're going to take all that stuff we learned like last week and this week, and we're going to smash it together, and we're going to actually build some components tomorrow. So get excited. I'm excited. Okay, guys, have a good afternoon. See ya.